Hey guys, this episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Dexcom. Dexcom, of course, is the continuous glucose monitor that gives you a complete picture of your glucose by showing you where it's going and how fast it's getting there. We're also sponsored by Omnipod, the tubeless insulin pump that brings you peace of mind with its flexible and precise design. Simple and discreet, the waterproof Omnipod is the way to go. If you want a tubeless insulin pump, you definitely want to go to myomnipod.com/juicebox. And don't forget Dexcom, dexcom.com/juicebox. If you can't remember those, there's links in your show notes and at juiceboxpodcast.com. Welcome to episode 158? 157? 157. Welcome to episode 157 of the Juicebox Podcast. Today's episode is called Lindsey is a Cornacopia of Emotions. I reached out on Facebook, I think, looking for the answer to a really kind of strange question that popped into my head. And Lindsey said, I can answer that question. And then when she came on, she shared stuff that was unexpected. I'm going to say unexpected, as was the entire conversation. Just really great. And it picked up as it went. It was like a rock rolling downhill. It started off and I was like, oh, this is going to be good. And then by the time it was over, I was like, bah! What a great ride. All right, people, listen. What am I going to say here? Nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before being bold with insulin. By the way, if you're a Basil fan, there is some quality Basil snoring in the beginning of this episode. Have to try to remember the genesis of this exactly. So I'm online and I see somebody say something about being scared of something going away. And I have this immediate thought. Is this person saying that they're, what would they do if diabetes went away? And I started having this whole daydream about I wonder if how that would feel to people. And you assume most people would just be like, this is fantastic. But I said, but somebody must have had diabetes for so long that they would feel like a little piece of them is gone or some of their identity or something like that. Then, by the way, I went back and reread what the person wrote. I just misread them.
You see what you want to see.
Well, at the very least, what ended up happening was I thought this would be great. I wonder if there's anybody who feels like this. And I went on Facebook and I was like, does anybody think it would be scary to be cured? And there were two people. There were a lot of voices who were like, no way. But there were two people who said, I can see what you're saying. And you were one of them. So I really appreciate you coming on and doing this. Thank you so much.
I have thought about this before, meeting people who have had pancreas transplants, which I know is not a cure, but it does, it does make the diabetes part pretty much go away.
Right.
In some cases. And just thinking, what would that be like if I could wake up whenever I wanted?
Yeah.
And, it's terrifying to completely be able to change the way you live. Like every moment of your life might be different.
Yeah. No, it's so we'll start right away at the beginning. How old were you when you were diagnosed?
I was almost 12. It was less than a month to my 12th birthday.
So you're a good long time into having diabetes. You're, 18 years? That was quick math. Am I right?
Yeah, it's about 18 years. And, but being diagnosed at 12 is a lot different than having it as a small child. Like I never had my parents take care of it for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like I took over myself as soon as we left the hospital. So there's a lot of experiences I don't understand. And volunteering recently, I started volunteering with JDRF chapter here, and I didn't realize how much, the disease affected parents. I know that's really, really ridiculous to say out loud, but, I only had my experience. I never even considered that, when children are young, it's the parents have the disease too.
Right. Yeah, it's funny because you're seeing what you're talking about right now is super interesting, right? Because you're diagnosed such a long time ago, not to try to make you feel old, but so long ago that it's really before any semblance idea of glucose monitoring or even people who are testing as frequently as people test nowadays who don't have glucose monitors, right? So you were more in this space of this is how much insulin you take at this time, and then you eat, and then you take insulin again. Is that about how tell me a little bit about your day. When you were 12 years old and you're like, I'm taking care of my diabetes now, what did that mean?
Yeah, there wasn't even a sliding scale, or I don't even remember what they called it now. I had to eat this many carbs at lunch. I could not have more or less because I was taking insulin for that many carbs. I couldn't have an extra cookie and take a little more insulin. That was not part of the regimen. And that was very restricting.
Yeah.
And not fun, especially, like I said, it was a month before my birthday. So my first diabetic birthday was very unhappy.
Because they restricted foods from you, right? There were certain things they would not let you have.
Well, I could only have, 60 carbs per meal, 15 carbs per snack. So, cake, I could have one piece of cake at my mealtime, and that would be all the food that I could have for the rest of the day. So that they didn't say you can't have this candy bar, but, I could only have 60 carbs. That's not a lot of carbs.
Right. Oh, so you had a number. You were eating to a number.
Yes.
Did that cause you any kind of weird feelings about food?
I definitely have some eating issues, some binging issues, which may or may not be related to the diabetes. Probably, I can only have this many, and I would sneak candy a lot as a kid, and got in a lot of trouble because it was against the rules. How do you explain to this kid that these are the rules or you're going to die?
And so that is it really. So when you say they're against the rules, it really was the idea of there's a set written rule that came from a doctor and we're following it. It wasn't so much about your health. The way you think about your management now, I would imagine, is more about keeping your blood sugar in a range, trying not to spike or fall too far and things like that. But none of those were considerations. The rules were just, this is how much food you can eat. This is how much insulin we give you.
Yes,
wow.
That's exactly it.
Wow.
And it was like that for years.
And that's just 18 years ago, which is not that long. At what point in your life does that start transitioning away from that? Who's the first doctor, or you were the first person who says this is not tenable, we can't do this?
I did not start being that honest with my doctor until about 5 years ago.
Okay.
It was more of a, yes, that's exactly what I'm doing, and lying, which is not how you're supposed to handle this disease at all. Doctors are now my partners, and I'm honest with what I can and can't handle, and they work with me, and it's wonderful. But as a child, I lied. And
even into your mid-20s, you just would go in that room and just be like, everything's right as rain, man. Don't worry about it.
Yes.
And did your A1C reflect that?
Yes. Well, it wasn't. It was bad. It was I was around a 8.5 to a 9 all of those years I was lying. And it showed when I changed my attitude and my behavior. When I wasn't just trying to ignore the disease, when I actually started taking care of myself, it reflected immediately.
Okay. And then I'm assuming you didn't go into the doctor's office and say, hey, not for nothing, but I've been lying to you for the past 12 or 13 years, and I've decided not to do that anymore. And so when you made the change on your end and the A1C started dropping, I'm assuming, did the doctor commented on that?
Oh, no, I straight up told him, I've been lying to you. I want to take this seriously now. These are the steps I want to take. What are your thoughts?
Good for you.
I was very honest with him.
Wow, good for you. Now, can you share with me what brought you to that? What made you say, I'm done with it this way. I'm going to do it better.
My parents had gotten very overweight, and it was starting to affect their daily life and their physical abilities. And I looked at them and said, I can't be like that. I need to take things more seriously. And so that's what changed my mind. And I began actually trying and understanding what I was doing. And I've turned it all around. Things are great.
Good for you.
And being honest with my doctor was really, I joined a support group for chronic conditions. and they had a class about communicating with your healthcare team. And they really pushed that you have to be honest. If you're not going to take the medication, don't tell them you're taking it, because that will affect their judgments. So if I hadn't told them that I've been lying and they saw this change, they'd be checking for what could possibly have caused this. Like, they might think something else was happening.
Yeah, it's such a good point. If you're not being clear with them, then they don't have all the pieces, then they start trying to put a puzzle together without all the pieces, and then they're going to end up doing a lot of things that aren't good for you, trying to do something good for you. And
exactly.
Yeah, that's a danger you don't want. So, okay, now I have a lot of questions. Eventually we'll get to why you're on. So why, so you said your parents had a weight increase that scared you. Were you also having a weight increase as a family? Were you all trending in one way, or did you just see it happen to them and think, I don't want that to be me?
We were all trending in that way.
Okay.
My eating habits were taking after theirs, and yeah, we were all overweight. And my parents have taken it more seriously, and they're losing weight as well. And I've learned to eat foods that aren't beige. I spent a year vegan. That has really educated me about nutrition and vitamins and whatnot. And,
you have to tell me what that means, though. You won't eat foods that are beige. Tell me why.
Well, I was eating exclusively foods that were beige.
Okay.
Fried foods, pasta, chicken, just, the stuff that tastes really good but doesn't do much for your body.
Oh, that's so interesting. I've never even considered it like that, but that's amazing. All right, so because I've seen a picture of you, and you seem like an average-looking body type. Like, I wouldn't look at you and go, well, that girl looks like she'd been overweight at some point. So you're in a good place now as far as you're concerned, I would imagine.
I'm in a better place. I actually, last year, had another autoimmune disorder flare up.
Good for you. No, I'm just kidding. And you get an autoimmune disease. And you get an autoimmune disease. You're like, I got one already, thank you. But no, what happened?
So actually, about 4 years ago, my thyroid started becoming overactive.
Mm-hmm.
And we were treating it, and eventually it went away. But last year, it came back again, and we had to kill it, the radioactive iodine treatment. So my thyroid was overactive, and then during the treatment, it's really overactive, and I wasn't allowed to exercise at all. Like, I couldn't even take leisurely walks, because if you raise your heart rate too high, you could risk permanent damage.
Wow.
Yeah, so I actually had to let go of my exercise regimen for 6 months during the treatment, and I kind of lost a lot of progress. So I have goals that I'm reaching for, and I'm able to start working towards them again, but I'm still much better than I was when I started, and I can see the goals. I will get there.
And I'm thinking most people are like, I wish a doctor would tell me I couldn't exercise. Like, how great would that be if my doctor's like, listen, it's my medical advice that you should not exercise. Well, I'm sorry that things are piling up upon things. That sucks, and I don't like to hear that at all. Obviously, and I'm sure you didn't either. But still, so the weight. I just want to go for a minute. So, like, to you, the diabetes. It's interesting because I don't think of weight and diabetes as being, I don't know if I'm going to get lost in a thought here, so bear with me for a second. But when I think about the health that revolves around diabetes, I just think about it as blood sugars in a range that we've decided on, and trying not to peak too far out of that range for too long, and below that range for too long. But I'm wondering, as you're speaking, if I only think about that aspect of it because my daughter's is like a fit child. Like, I wonder if I don't think about the rest of it because it's not an issue for me. Do you know what I mean? Like, I bet you, I'm now thinking that if my daughter's weight was in some way a health concern, that I would tie that in my mind back to the diabetes too.
And you're forced to as well, because when you're overweight, your insulin needs are different than fit people. And as you're losing weight and exercising more, every day you have no idea what your insulin sensitivity is going to be.
Oh, okay. Oh,
So,
okay.
yeah, I have to adjust my temporary basals every single day, depending on my activity level and if my weight is trending downwards or plateauing. There is so much to take into consideration because I let it get so far out of hand, and now I'm trying to get back.
That all makes sense. It didn't strike me initially like that, but that makes total sense. Okay, so you go to your doctor. Now, I am interested. You go to your doctor and tell him, I've been lying to you forever about how I take care of myself. And what was the reaction back from the doctor? Like, I don't know if I'm more interested in, like, I guess I want to hear first, like, could you tell on a human level, was the doctor like, oh my God, I just waste my time here? Do you know what I mean? Like what was their reaction?
Well, my doctor is not a very expressive man. He's a little bit cold, and I love him. He's great, but he's not easy to read. Though the last few years before I told him, you could see it in his face. He knew I was lying. He knew the numbers I was showing him weren't real. He knew all I wanted was my insulin prescription, and I could tell.
Yeah.
And so when I told him, there wasn't much of a reaction, but in the following appointments, you could tell that he felt differently. Like, he cares more about my treatment because I do. Like, we communicate and we have conversations, and it's not checking check boxes off his list. His attitude is a little warmer, and our relationship has changed.
The Omnipod tubeless insulin pump is waterproof. You can wear it in the shower, the bathtub, or the swimming pool. The Omnipod is also discreet. It's so tiny and lightweight that you can wear it anywhere that you would inject. And you can dress however you want. No one would ever know you're wearing it unless you want them to. Now that's simple, isn't it? An insulin pump with no tubes that's discreet, flexible, waterproof. The Omnipod even inserts on its own. Well, automatically. Like, it doesn't come to life and walk across the room and like put itself on you. But you put the pod on and then just push a button and then it automatically inserts. It's hands-free. With just a simple push of a button, you're wearing the Omnipod and it is delivering your insulin. You could even sleep in tomorrow because you're not on injections anymore. You don't have to wake up to get your slow-acting insulin going. Oh, that sounds good. I know you know that sounds good. Let me tell you some real-world stuff about the Omnipod. Just last weekend, Arden was in an all-day softball tournament. It was indoors because the weather around here is not great yet. So she was across this field in this bubble thing, wearing her Omnipod. We kept her blood sugar around 85 through 3 softball games spread out over 8 hours. Little bumps and nudges of insulin. Throughout the day, we used her basal insulin, increases and decreases, to manipulate her blood sugar and keep it where we wanted it. She had a big lunch. We bolused for it, no problem. Everything done right through the Omnipod. This Omnipod was out of her way, no problem. She was running around, hitting a ball, throwing a ball, sliding, diving all over the place. Never an issue. You can get a free no obligation demo of the Omnipod today by going to myomnipod.com/juicebox or by clicking on the links in your show notes. So if I'm right, what you're saying is that he knew, first of all, you were involved in one of the things in life that scare me the most. Like, there's nothing to me more frightening in an interpersonal relationship when both people are lying and both people are aware they're lying. That seems like such an incredible waste of time to me. And I don't mean that harshly towards your situation. I'm talking about that bigger in life in general. Like, I can think of almost nothing worse than me taking the time to make up a story to tell you and you taking the time to pretend you believe it. It's just like, I'm like, wow, we shouldn't even be talking to each other.
I agree. And it was a waste of our time, but I needed that prescription. I couldn't afford insulin without a prescription.
Yeah, and the rest of what I was going to say is that he's in this situation where he's a doctor. Like, he is bound to give you this care. And so he can only do what he can do, I guess. Like, I guess in his mind, if you're not going to be honest, he's waiting for you to be honest. And at some point, it sounds like it probably deadened him a little bit when you came in, because he was sort of like, look, I know this girl's not telling me the truth, but I'm not her dad. I'm her doctor. I'm not her conscience. I'm her doctor. So I'll do the best I can do for her with the information she's willing to give me. What do you think would have been valuable? Like, is there something he could have done that could have sped up this process, or do you think you just needed to come to this on your own?
I believe that people have to want it. I don't think there's anything you can say, to lots of people who are choosing to hurt themselves. I don't think you can say things to them. I wish it was as easy as saying words, but they have to want it.
Yeah, he couldn't have said to you.
Want it.
He couldn't have said to you like, "Hey, I need you to go see a therapist" or something. Or do you think any of that would have been valuable for you?
I think I would have resented him greatly if he suggested that I needed therapy, which we probably all do.
Sure. No, I should be there right now. And so, so you said something just now that made me, I want to ask you, do you think looking back, were you trying to hurt yourself in some way, or was it just an overall self-esteem issue, or were you mad about having diabetes, or do you know what? I
was avoiding dealing with it. I didn't want the disease. I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to put the effort into maintaining it because I didn't want it. And no one wants it.
No, yeah, right. But no one wants it, but this was your reaction to not wanting it. And did you feel that way back when you were younger and you were diagnosed, or did this happen to you as you grew older?
No, the whole time. I acted this way for, oh God, what would that be? Like 10, 12 years now? It was a long time that I just didn't care, didn't want it, did the bare minimum to feel good.
Right. And so you weren't even considering your health. You were just like, what gets me to where I can do the things I want to do today without being in pain or sick or that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay.
And I did keep myself out of the hospital. During the thyroid stuff, it was a little more difficult, but I stayed out of the hospital. I kept myself feeling, using the bare minimum amount of effort. I kept myself good.
Isn't that something? Wow. And so not only is this happening to you, but you're well aware that it's going on. It's not like you're having some sort of an odd reaction that you don't understand. You're conscious of what's happening. Like, that's even more.
That's terrifying. Thinking back on it.
Yeah, I guess so. Like, I searched for an adjective just there, and I didn't know where to go, to be perfectly honest with you. I couldn't say if it is on my end, if it's interesting or terrifying or exactly what it is. It's the idea that you were not just doing these things, but you were aware that you were doing them, and you had a line that you had drawn for, like, well, as long as I don't go past this, I'm okay with this. Did you think, while you were doing it, you were limiting the distance that your life would travel while you were doing it?
I honestly, even now, with me caring, there are worse things to me than death. And I know that's really morbid, and I don't know if you want to go there.
Not at all. What's something that's worse than death? Now, I've been married for 21 years, so you're gonna have a hard time shocking me. But go ahead. What's worse than death?
Getting another disease.
Something else to deal with, and not being.
Yeah, just more things that I have to struggle with, and more things that I have to maintain. Like, death will be so much easier than having another autoimmune disease. And so
I want to sort of back up for a second so that you can. Do you feel in any way, this is not even why we had Lindsey on the podcast, but we're doing a great job nevertheless. Are you a depressed person?
I have had depression. I'm not now, and I do sometimes wonder if my thoughts are dangerous or if I'm just being realistic and I have a different experience in life than other people, because I am not depressed now. I feel fantastic. I am happier than I have ever been. I feel great. But, I mean, just being honest, like, death would be a nice release. You know how many times I'd have to stab myself if I were dead? Zero. Now, okay. I like where we're going with this. So I feel like you're talking about this in a more of a kind of like in your head theoretical way, and not like, hey, I'm thinking that when the podcast is over, I'm going to go hop out a window, and so I'm really, I think it's cool to talk about, because I get what you're saying. Like, if you're being
there is a point where something hits you. Listen, you could be the happiest, most fulfilled, joyous person in the world. And if I start waterboarding you for 15 years, you'll probably be like, you know what, I give up. It's over. Let it be. Everyone's got a limit to how much they can accept before they just say, I don't have any more stretch. I can't bend anymore. And then I think that, some people would hear that and think, well, then you have to find a way to deal with it, which is, I think, what you've done. I think that you've dealt with it by saying to yourself, look, I'm going to do the best I can. I'm going to be as healthy as I possibly can be, but I'm not going to delude myself. I've lived a part of life that some people don't get to live, and I can tell you that there are worse things than dying. Like, I'm reading you pretty well?
Yeah. And the last 18 years might not have happened. Like, I was diagnosed with something that would have killed me 100 years ago. So I just want to keep doing what I'm doing because I can. Like, this is great.
You feel like you're in bonus time the whole time?
Yes. Yeah. And that is a gift. I mean, death might be a gift as well, but, having all this technology that allows me to, have dogs, be alive and experience the things I'm experiencing. That's great.
It's funny. I hope people can hear through, because if you're not taking you from the right perspective, you sound like you're saying two conflicting things, but you're not. It's pretty. I think you're fairly well realized over this. I think your path has led you to this ability to see sort of all angles of this idea. Like, you're thrilled to be alive, but you can also think about the rest of it. So I'm going to take a drink. Hold on a second.
Yeah. So I don't let the fear of dying, limit the things I experience. Like, oh, I can't do that because if my blood sugar goes over a certain number, I'm limiting the number of days here. I'm not going to live that way.
Okay. I see what you're saying. And so, but now so your weight was an impetus for you to think about your diabetes in a different way. You're thinking about your diabetes in a different way now. You've tried obviously a lot of different things. You tried eating differently, exercise. The thyroid thing got in the way of the exercise.
Yeah.
What are you doing right now? Do you have an insulin pump? Do you have a glucose monitor? How do you manage things today?
I have the T-Slim G4 and the Dexcom, and it has been lovely.
Do you think if somebody puts those tools in your hand when you're 12, do you think you're sitting in a different spot right now?
Now, I got an insulin pump when I was 14, and it did not change my habits at all. It just made it easier for me to be a little bit better. I could take insulin during class or in the middle of the night and not be inconvenienced. But if I had been given a CGM instead of the insulin pump when I was 14, I think my life would be a lot different.
Just the awareness and being able to see what was actually happening.
Seeing the immediate consequences of some of my choices has changed a lot of my actions.
So would you say then that your weight gain was sort of your first CGM? Like, it was the first time you were able to see when I do A, B happens? Like, that was the first time B was visual to you and like available for you to absorb? Does that make sense, or am I taking that wrong? Like,
it makes sense, but I think that the weight gain was more of a vanity check, and then seeing my parents not be able to do just basic tasks made me switch that vanity check over to a health check.
Gotcha.
And the diabetes wasn't really factored into that.
Lindsey was like, what's worse than dying? Staying alive and not being able to walk up the steps. Who's that?
Exactly.
Sort of, that's kind of what hit you. Okay. All right. Because it's, sometimes you think something has to happen so that you can understand, how your actions affect things further. And that's what one of the things the CGM is great for, is that and it's why, I was able to, and a lot of other people are able to make like better dosing decisions, because you can see like, wow, I did this right here, and then this happened. And, if I would have just maybe done it sooner or more or heavier or lighter or whatever, I can see how that would have changed the direction of my, you think of it as that graph line, but it's really the direction of your immediate future. You know what I mean? Like, is my blood sugar going to be high or low? Am I going to feel good or am I not? That kind of stuff.
And it's really affected exercise as well. Like, there are days where I look at that graph and I'm like, I really need to go to the gym. Tomorrow's going to suck if I don't go to the gym today. And that's why I go.
Because, tell people why, though. Elaborate on that if you would.
I mean, if I exercise, my insulin sensitivity is different. And if I spend the day where I'm like at 200 and I take insulin and it's not budging and it's not budging, I'm like, you know what? I need to bump up my sensitivity. So I go to the gym, I do my HIIT workout for 30 minutes, and then the whole next 24 hours is much easier to handle.
No kidding. So not that we don't know that exercise is, really impactful. Like, there's, there used to be the big blue test where you went out, you exercised for 15 minutes, you wrote down your blood sugar, and to show people that like a 160 blood sugar could become like a 110 blood sugar just from going for a walk for a couple of minutes, that how important being active is to how your insulin works for you. And
now that's an interesting example because my body doesn't work that way.
And I do know listen, you're great because you were going to say the next thing. I was like, good. I shouldn't have talked. Go ahead.
Yeah, my body doesn't work that way. When I'm exercising, unless I took a huge bolus right before, my blood sugar does not move while I'm active. It stays perfectly stable, which is scary but amazing.
How about when you're done without insulin? Would it fall later?
Yeah, a couple hours later, my insulin sensitivity changes and it starts to drop. And I'm sorry, my dogs just came in and I don't know where they came from.
It's fine. It's usually my dogs, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, a couple hours later, it'll start to affect me. And then the whole next day, my insulin sensitivity is better.
That's right.
But every body is different. You can follow advice, you can talk to people in support groups, but you have to remember that every body is different.
Yeah. No, my daughter's been in this weird space for about the last 6 weeks now, where her insulin needs are exactly the way they've always been. From the time she wakes up to all through the day, everything happens exactly the way I expected. Basal rates are the way I expect them to be. Bolusing for food's the way I expect it to be. Then all of a sudden at night, around 10 o'clock at night, she still needs the same bolus if she was going to eat, but her basal needs are almost non-existent into like 4 o'clock in the morning. And I know that's going to stop at some point soon. But I, for the life of me, can't figure out what it is. But there's been a number of long nights, turning insulin down, keeping it down, not wanting to keep it down so long that it jumps back up. So trying to stay aware. A couple too many juice boxes to the point where she was like, I don't want to drink a juice box. And I was like, no, I got you. I don't blame you. But it's weird because right before that, nothing was like that. And soon enough, whenever that soon enough is, it won't be like that again. And, and then you could tell that story to somebody else who might just be like, that's never happened to me. I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, it's really interesting. So, okay. So 35 minutes into it, the reason Lindsey came on the podcast. Sorry. I didn't know you were going to be so interesting. So I put this thing out on I feel like I'm 2 days ago. I put this thing on the internet. I was like, hey, if you were to get cured, does anyone see that as being frightening in some way or a loss or something like that? And you came right back and you said yes. And so I was wondering what you meant by that. Cliffhanger. Hey. All right, listen, let's keep talking about the softball game from last weekend. Arden's wearing her Omnipod, but she's also wearing a Dexcom G5 continuous glucose monitor. We can see her blood sugar, what it's doing, how fast it's doing it, what direction it's going in. That's where we get the indication for, hey, Arden, we need a temp basal decrease 50% for an hour. Or, hey, Arden, we need to bolus here. When we got to Arden's softball game, her blood sugar was so stable at 80, and then it tried to go up. I don't know if the adrenaline got a hold of her or what happened, but I was able to aggressively bolus, stop a spike, and get it right back where I wanted to because I could see her blood sugar on her Dexcom. Now, how could I see that if she was so far away? Well, Dexcom has a share feature. So Arden's carrying an iPhone with her that has the Dexcom Share app on it, and I'm carrying an iPhone with the Dexcom Follow app on it. It works with Android too, but I have an iPhone. So I'm seeing Arden's blood sugar as it's happening on my phone. That's that simple. A quick text message, hey, do this, hey, bolus that, hey, bang, bang, that, whatever. Doesn't matter. It's so simple. But it doesn't just work at a softball game. It works while they're sleeping over at a friend's house. It works while they're at school. It works while they're halfway across the country. If you're an adult living with type 1 diabetes, it works while you're at the office, or at the gym, or on vacation, or on a date, or sitting at home on your sofa. Knowing what direction your blood sugar is moving and how fast it's going in that direction is great. And you know what? You don't even have to pay attention to it because you can set rise and fall alerts. You can set thresholds. You can tell the Dexcom when you want to know what your blood sugar is. You can personalize it any way you want. Please go to dexcom.com/juicebox, or the link in your show notes to find out more.
There are a few reasons I'd be scared, but the biggest one, this goes back to the thyroid problem I had, where it just kind of went away for a few years. Every time my heart started to flutter, I was scared the thyroid was back. Like every time I felt a little weird and I didn't know why, I just knew I was sick. And I feel like if my diabetes were cured, I wouldn't wear my continuous glucose monitor all the time anymore. And every time I felt a little bit of adrenaline, I'd be worried my blood sugar's low. Every time I felt a little groggy and tired, I'd be like, my blood sugar's high. It's back. It's back. I'm sick again. I need to do something right now.
Oh my gosh. So oh, that's really so interesting. So when I said, hey, would anybody think it would be scary not to have diabetes go away? It's scary to you almost in the way of a heart attack survivor has that,
yes,
that constant fear forever. Like, I'm going to have another heart attack at some point, or somebody who's had cancer says, oh, how do I live not wondering if it's going to come back tomorrow? So you would almost prefer to have type 1 diabetes than to live knowing what it was, how it impacted your life, and worried constantly it was going to come back again.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because, at least I know.
Yeah.
I would prefer better technology to take care of it. But, at least I know what my blood sugar is at every moment. I know what's going to happen. And I'm not sitting there wondering, like, if I went on a roller coaster, when I got off, am I going to know that everyone else is feeling that way, or am I feeling a little bit different and I need to be worried?
Wow, Lindsey, you are a cornucopia of feelings. I didn't, by the way, that's the episode title, Cornucopia of Feelings, or Lindsey's a cornucopia of feelings. We'll see how it fits in the title box. But seriously, like, I'm so thrilled you came on, because I just thought, I have to admit, like, when someone comes on, I sort of in my own mind, everyone who's ever been on the podcast can tell you, and you can attest to this, we do literally no preparation beforehand. I don't know anything about you when this starts, because I really want us to have this conversation. But in my mind, you know how like you hear someone on the radio and then you see them in person, like, that's not what I thought they'd look like. So when you told me you would be scared if your diabetes went away, I just extrapolated out a completely different story than the one you just told. So you really took me by surprise, because I expected you to say that it's been such a big part of my life. Maybe I wouldn't know who I was without it, or say something like that. But you really, you showed a different level.
Well,
yeah.
Like, it is a part of my identity. I do have a big tattoo on my forearm for medical alert. Mm-hmm. I spend my time volunteering and educating people around me. It is a part of who I am,
yeah.
But I've
that
had
stuff you could
other
adjust
hobbies
to.
that I can give up.
Right. That stuff you could eventually adjust to, but you don't think you'd ever be able to adjust to the looming nausea that you would feel that today was the day it was coming back.
Yeah, I would probably test myself all the time. I would be very worried, and it would probably get better every year, but I don't think I would ever not have a glucose meter in the house just to comfort myself.
You're making, I'm going to draw the oddest parallel here, but you just made me think of like those World War I, World War II movies where the pilots have to go, they crash into the ocean and then they're alive. And when I see them in the little plastic boat or paddling, I think in their mind, they must be thinking, a shark's about to bite me. A shark's about to bite me. Because I would just think that until the shark bit me. And like, you know what I mean? Like, I just like, that is sort of the feeling. Like, how do you, when you know it's there and you know how dangerous it is and you know what it could do to you when it gets to you, and you imagine that it is just a matter of time before it happens, how do you... It's interesting. No, but you don't think about death that way.
No.
Like, you're not sitting around every day.
That happens to everyone eventually in a million different ways.
Yeah. Lindsey, you're very interesting.
Is that code word for crazy?
I don't know what it is. Do you with somebody, or because if you're not, this might be why.
No, my boyfriend lives with me, and he helps take care of me in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
In fact, I told him about the new bolusing from the phone patent that I heard about.
Oh, really?
For Tandem. Mm-hmm. And he's like, if I could bolus you from my phone, that would really help me in the middle of the night.
Changes the world. Well, yeah. Well, so, and joking a little bit, I don't think you're crazy. I think that you're considering more than a lot of people consider sometimes. You know what I mean? Yep. Like there's ways to get through the day, and then there's ways to realize that, everything around you really, and there's a fine line, like, between being paranoid and being just aware that it is true. Like I have a very big old oak tree in front of our house, and it is not lost on me that if it fell, it would just kill us all. Like, and so my brain says to me, well, that thing's been there for 70 years. It's not going to fall over. And I go, okay. And then I never think about it again. But every once in a while I walk outside and I go, I wonder which one of the kids would take it the worst if that happened in the middle of the night. It would be the girl, by the way, because her room's more to the corner. But the point is that, a healthy mind doesn't spend time thinking about that constantly. And yours doesn't either, because you're so blasé about the end of your life that you're just like, nah, it's fine, I'm good. But to think that was the concern that popped into your head, if you took my diabetes away today, I would just constantly be scared it would come back. I think what that shows more than anything is the impact that the diabetes has had on your life. Yeah.
And just how much of every aspect of my life is affected by it.
Yeah. You really you're just giving me a lot to think about, because you sound like you were, abducted when you were 12, and you've been kept in a dark room for the last 18 years, and now you're out, and all you can probably think about is, what if someone else grabs me and sticks me back in that room again? It just, yes. Yeah. And I think it's probably an apt comparison that diabetes does. We all do a really good job. Everybody does a really good job of living the best they can every day with type 1, right? But you can't, and the way you do that is by not thinking about the parts of it that it's sort of taken. But at the same time, I put you in this sort of like fantasy world where I asked you to think about it, and that's what you thought about.
I talk to a lot of people, and I know you have experienced this, where they hear the word diabetes and they want to tell you about everyone they've ever known who's had diabetes. And I get a lot of, oh yeah, I knew someone that had type 1 diabetes, but they didn't take care of themselves. And I find myself like defending this stranger who they're insulting behind their back. Like, it's really hard. Like, you don't understand when you have to think about it every moment of every day. Sometimes you just want to break and you can't take it.
Yeah.
And you might see them behaving a certain way and think, oh, they don't care about themselves. Oh, they're a bad diabetic. No, they're trying their hardest. It's just way harder than you think.
Yeah.
Every day, in and out.
I remember, it's funny because we're recording this on the weekend of the hurricane in Texas. And because I don't know when this will go up. So that's towards the end of August, if you're listening and you're wondering when it was. And what you just said made me think about a conversation I had with a neighbor going all the way back to Katrina.
Before you start,
go ahead.
I was actually also in Katrina. That's my cornucopia of feelings, and lost everything.
Of course you are. How would you not have been? Did a piece of debris happen to hit you in the thyroid during that storm, by any chance? Well, so, okay, hold on a second. We might get back to that. But I'm talking to a neighbor, right, who makes this statement that I found just insane, that why don't they just leave? And I said, well, hey, what if they can't afford to leave? And he's like, who couldn't afford to leave? I'm like, well, try to imagine being a person who doesn't have enough money to, with 3 days notice, leave a place where they know is going to be swelled over by an ocean, basically. I'm like, I said, try imagine being that broke. And then he goes into, well, if you work harder. And I'm like, no. I'm like, he's like, I worked hard. And I said to him, like, didn't you go to college? And he said, yeah. I was like, did your parents pay for it? And he goes, well, yeah. I mean, I'm like, so you're proud of the hard work you put in after someone else paid to send you to college? I was like, what does that mean even? Like, he goes, well, other people could do that. And I was like, some people live in generational systemic poverty and lack of education. I said, you might be looking at a person who hasn't been in a family structure that's made more than $12,000 a year for 80 years and hasn't completed any education of any meaningful thing for 50 years. And if that's the case, how are you telling them all you need to do is go out into this world and figure it out and do it the way I did? I said, they don't have any of the tools that you have. And he couldn't see that. Because I think that if he imagined that, then he'd realize how random the success in his life was and how little it had to do with his hard work and how much it had to do with just the random goodness of how his life fell into place. And it's not lost on me that while you're talking and I'm thinking, wow, I'm so lucky to this point that my daughter is not having the issues that you had, she could, there's that, I'm not religious enough to know the saying, but it's like, there for the grace of God go I, right? Go, or whatever. There's probably a thee in there or something like that because it's more religious. But that idea that had just a couple of things fallen differently for me, my reality could easily be your reality and vice versa. And that's what you're making me think of.
We can only know our own experiences, and trying to judge people based on our experiences is not
it's a waste
fair
of time
to them.
Yeah, it's unfair to them, but it's also just a waste of your time. And it's just an exercise in you trying to feel better about yourself. It is a very common thing for people to just try to find somebody doing worse than them so they can say, oh, look at these people. What a mess. Not like me. Look how I have it together.
Exactly. And I feel like these people are trying to compliment me by saying, but, they were a bad diabetic.
Not like you and me. You're a great diabetic, and if I had diabetes, I'd be way good at it. That's all I wanted to say here. Yeah, this sounds very reminiscent of somebody in the country right now. But so it's fascinating, and it's not just around diabetes. It's just how people's minds work. I tried to tell my son one time when he was much younger. He had this moment where I think he had a realization that he was academically much stronger than a friend of his. And I said to him, there's somebody somewhere right now who could look at you and think, wow, this kid's impaired compared to me. You know what I mean? I'm like, we're all just, if you're going to really stop and try to slot us all into a space, first of all, that's a big waste of your time. But secondly, it's not important. I said, your friend's still a good guy, right? He's a good person. You like him and all that stuff. And there's a guy out there somewhere who's probably way smarter than you, who's also a good guy. You guys could all know each other and be great friends. It doesn't matter which one of you is academically stronger than the other one. And just remember, there's always somebody out there who is bigger, stronger, faster, better, smarter than you are. You're not the one. You know what I mean? So if you're thinking of, crapping on the person below you, just remember there's somebody who at this moment is being kind enough not to crap on you.
And if they don't exist yet, they'll exist tomorrow.
Right. It's Lindsey, I don't even know why you came on anymore. I don't even remember. This has been so good. All right. Go, damn it. Lindsey, tell me about being in Katrina. How old were you?
Oh, I had just graduated high school.
Oh my gosh.
I had spent 1 week at college, and I went to college in New Orleans, and it was. I remember we were walking around. There's 2 or 3 feet of water in the house, and everyone is scrambling around trying to get stuff up to the second floor to stay dry. And I was feeling a little wonky, just a little short of breath. And I'm like, I need to take a break. And my mother's like, yeah, you take care of you. The last thing we need is you to be sick. And I just started crying because I want to help.
Right.
And I couldn't.
Yeah.
I needed to care more about how I was feeling than whether or not all the food made it upstairs.
Right. Isn't that something? And there's an irony too. All you want to do is help. Your health is keeping you from helping. And then in an effort to tell you that it's okay, sweetie, we understand, you take care of you, all that really did was make you realize, oh my God, I'm not helping because of my health. And it's you almost can't escape the spiral that situation ends up being, you know? So a couple feet of water in your house, how long did the water stay in your house?
Well, actually, that wasn't even my house. My house was much closer to the beach, and it had water up over the roof.
Wow.
This was my boyfriend at the time, his parents' house that we evacuated to, which was farther inland.
Okay.
And yeah, it got 4 feet of water on the first floor.
Wow.
And so we spent the day on the second floor.
What does that do to a house afterwards? Is it livable after that, or does it need major reconstruction after something like that happens?
They had to... what they do is they cut off above the water line because it comes in the house slowly. So everything above the water line, it's not like it's splashing around with big waves. So they cut off the drywall above the water line and they spray the wood studs for mold and then they put all that back up.
Okay. So the house is allowed to dry out. It's treated with something and it's put back together again?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, I mean, you don't have, air conditioning, but, if you have a second floor, that could be livable. Or you get a trailer and you live in the trailer while you fix the house up. Mm-hmm. But yeah, they fixed it up and it looked better than before.
Do people who can afford it just abandon the area ever? Do you see people just be like, that's enough for me, I'm out of here?
Most of my neighborhood was completely abandoned.
Wow.
Because you get your insurance money and you get more of it if you rebuild, but you get insurance money, and a lot of people just left because Katrina especially, you couldn't hire anyone to fix your houses. There was too much damage in too wide of an area that, getting a team down there was way more expensive than if it wasn't a damaged area.
There are not enough hands to help everybody who needs the help, so then it becomes either impossible to find or too expensive once you find it.
Exactly. Wow. And to this day, there are still houses that were just abandoned and they can't sell them because
they never got repaired. Wow. So it's a devastation, not just in the moment, but for a long time afterwards. The area is just never the same again.
Yeah. I know that some of the smaller hurricanes in other areas while I was living down there, it was much easier to fix up like 3 towns than it is to fix up, 4 or 5 states?
Yeah, it was crazy.
So that is unique to Katrina. That's not the case like Ivan damaged Pensacola, but all of that was repaired. Like none of it sat there for decades.
So as a person with diabetes, when you hear a hurricane is coming and it's going to be that kind of thing where you have to run inland, how much of your focus goes to your medication and your things like that? Is that the first thing you think of, or?
Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
Makeup's on the list, but it's much farther down.
Well, if the news comes, you are going to want to spruce up a little bit before you go out.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Because you have that thought when your kid's first diagnosed, it rains hard. You're like, what if all the, what if the pharmacy was closed and I dropped this vial of insulin? And what if everybody drops their vial of insulin at the same time? Am I going to have to shoot somebody at the pharmacy to get Arden her insulin? Like, you know what I mean? Like
I'm terrified of international travel. I don't know if I'd be able to do it.
Okay.
Because the black market value of insulin is very high.
Mm-hmm. And so what if I got there and I couldn't get some, or I lost mine?
Someone stole mine,
or anything like that. We don't actually, when we go, we infrequently, but a few times in our life, like to go to the Caribbean on vacation. And we only go to the U.S. Virgin Islands for some reason, because it feels like, at least if there was a problem, we could, I don't know. Like I don't know. It's probably a completely unreasonable feeling, but
yes,
you know what I mean?
It's totally irrational. They have diabetics in other countries. It's going to be, it might be expensive, but it's going to be fine.
Do you think the British Virgin Islands has somebody with diabetes too? Yeah, so you have that, like, but to make the point is the first time we ever traveled like that was a long time ago when Arden was much younger, and it was one of the considerations I remember discussing. Well, at least it's a U.S. held territory. And, you know, I guess we ended up liking the place, so we visit back a lot. But, you know, one of the things that got us there was just an irrational thought about insulin. It really was. So, and I pack enough when I leave to I would say, you know, keep 8 to 10 people with diabetes really healthy for like a month. You know, like, it's just, there's so much stuff. Like, I look at the Omnipods I take with me and I'm like, what am I expecting to happen here? You know, like, is she going to need one every day? Which, why do I have so many? But then,
hey, you might. I mean, you better have it, and it's not doing you any good at home.
Well,
that's
right.
how I think about it.
Right. So when you're like, wow, Katrina's coming, your first thought is, we're getting out of here, and I got to make sure I have all the stuff with me.
Katrina was not our first hurricane.
Oh, okay.
Having to leave every single time is a crazy thought.
Okay.
There are so many hurricanes, apparently not in the last 12 years, but when I was living in Mississippi, it was just every year there were a couple of hurricanes. You can't leave for every single one.
You can't bug out every time.
Yeah, and they kicked us out of our neighborhood, which is why we went 7 miles inland. Not enough, by the way.
Not enough.
We really thought that it was going to hook and hit Florida, so we didn't leave like days before. Mm-hmm. And then once you get up to the day, the traffic's so bad that we couldn't have made it very far.
Right. Well, that's the other thing, is that everybody's now driving on these roads. And I actually said that to my wife the other day. They were interviewing some guy who was like, you know, I don't feel like we have to leave because we're 10 miles from that line. And I was like, why is the guy acting like 10 miles is a big deal for a storm that's 300 miles across? Like, why is 10 miles the deciding factor for him? He's like, oh, don't worry, we're 10 miles away, it'll be fine. I'm like, 10 miles is not that far. And it's funny how I get exactly what you're saying. I get you can't leave every time. And yet when you heard a guy on the news say, we're not going anywhere, I was like, you're a fool. But he's, to your point, he's lived there his whole life, and he's like, look, I can't leave every time this happens.
Yeah, you get kind of jaded and kind of deadened to the threat, which is dangerous, obviously. But yeah, when you experience it not hurt you so many times, it's hard to take it seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, the night before, we had a bonfire on the beach. We're like, oh, Katrina's coming, let's go have a party.
Right. You know, it's a good reason to get together.
Yeah, I got my first tattoo that night.
Did you really?
It was a horrible idea. I couldn't wash it. It went bad. But yeah, that's what you do. There's a hurricane. Let's go get tattoos and light stuff on fire.
Oh my gosh. Geez, that's another incredible perspective. Lindsey is a completely, she's just like looking from behind the mirror at yourself a little bit. Like she's seeing things in a. Do you have this feeling about I guess you do, about other aspects of your life? You don't, like the way you spoke about earlier about like there's things worse than death. You, like, other aspects of your life, are you sort of carefree about it in that regard too? Do you think about things differently as a whole, or do you think it's...
I mean, I'm a little bit of a control freak, but I definitely have worked on my perspective in a way that I stay happy about it.
Okay, I gotcha. Well, yeah, and you've got that boyfriend. You can tell him what to do.
He has helped me so much because he is not a worrier.
Right.
And he is not a super planner. Mm-hmm. He went out of the country and like didn't even have a hotel reserved. I couldn't do that.
So my wife and I have this same dynamic where my wife is very sort of like structured and type A, I guess. And we were first married. This is going to sound completely ridiculous, and this will be a great way to end the hour. So I had watched the movie The American President in the middle of the week, and it had made me feel very patriotic, and I don't know why. And I said to my wife, my very new wife, by the way, we had only been married for a very short amount of time. I said, hey, this weekend, let's go to D.C. and sightsee. I said, I've just watched The American President. I'm feeling very patriotic. You should watch it too. You will also feel patriotic. And then we will go to D.C. and we will sightsee. And she was like, okay, because we weren't together that long. And she was probably like, what idiot did I marry? But you know, she's like, okay. So I said, when we get home on Friday afternoon, let's just, you know, throw a bag together and we'll go. And she's like, okay. So we get in the car and I've got this Jeep. We've got the top down. We're really young. We haven't been married very long. And we're going down 95, going south down 95 towards DC. And she says, where's the map? This is before navs and cell phones and things like that. And I said, I don't have a map. She goes, well, oh, you've been there before? And I'm like, no, not really. Like, you know, I went with a school trip when I was a kid. And she's like, well, how are we going to know when we get there? And I said, well, I figured we'd drive south on 95 till we saw giant white buildings, and then we'd get off and exit, and we had a hotel room, and then we'll find the hotel. I'm like, it's numbered streets going one way and letters going the other way. We just have to find where like the G and the 10 intersect. You know, like it shouldn't be that difficult. And she just, you know, played it so like, yeah, sure, everything's fine. Well, we got to the hotel, Lindsey. We checked in. She got in bed like she had been kidnapped and beaten and pulled the blankets up to her chin and looked horrified. And I was like, I'm like, hey, what's wrong? And she's like, I just want to try to go to sleep. And I was like, are you okay? She goes, that was just the worst 3 hours of my life. And I was like, why? And she goes, because I didn't know where we were going. And I said, what? We were going south till we saw the big white buildings. I said, it worked. We're here. And she just, her personality did not lend to that. And that's really one of the first times I recognized the real difference between that, you know, like that, how like free. And I was just like, well, it'll be fine. And she was like, oh God, why don't we have a map? How come we haven't talked about this? Why didn't we write this down? It was no joke to her. She was not overreacting. It is just how her brain works. And
I was anxious just listening to you tell that story.
And really, it makes sense, right? South 95, big white buildings all lit up. Look for an exit that says Washington, D.C. on it, and you're there, right? Doesn't that make sense? You're like, no, it does not make any sense at all.
That's how it happens in TV and movies. I'll give you that.
Driving to Washington, D.C., worse than death.
Oh, yeah. Like, oh, that would make me so anxious.
Isn't that
like,
something?
Where can we stop for gas on the way? Like, what if you get a flat tire?
Oh my God. See, it's such a great insight, because that is exactly how she felt. And it would have never occurred to me. And because we had only been together for a short time, I think she was just trying to be a sport. You know what I mean? And so she didn't bring it up. Now, if I said something like that, she'd be like, you're an idiot, and I'm not doing that. And I'll be like, oh, okay. And so, but it just...
Bring me the dossier and we'll talk.
Yeah. Let's go over this a couple times before we leave and make sure everyone... Even tomorrow, I'm taking my son to Boston to do a couple college visits. And the extent of my planning is that... I know what hotel we're staying at. And I've made a reservation, and I know what time he has to be at the school on Tuesday morning. And that's pretty. Other than that, I couldn't possibly tell you anything else about the trip. And if I told my wife that, she'd be irritated with me.
So, do you already have the snacks in the bags? Do you have a cooler set up?
No, so I'm not. So this is my son who doesn't have diabetes. So my daughter will stay behind, right? But still.
But you're still human beings. You guys have to eat and drink,
Never
right?
heard of a Wawa? You must have something like a Wawa down there, right? It's a place where there's gas and food at the same place. It's America. Where could you go where you couldn't eat if you had just $10 in your pocket? You'd be fine.
I need the cooler.
I'm actually going to go out today and buy a backpack because I don't have one, and I don't even want to take a piece of luggage with me. I'm like, that's too much. You know, so it's two different ways of thinking about things.
It is. And he has helped me a lot, kind of let go of some of these irrational fears and calm down a little and be more realistic.
Well, let me tell you this.
I only need a week of supplies for 2 days. I don't need a month.
Nice. No, that's good. Listen, that's a nice improvement. But let me say this, as a person who's been married for 21 years to a person who sounds like you a little bit, you will eventually find a way to ignore the good advice that he's given you about relaxing. And one day, when it's far too late, you'll just pummel him with your anxiety until he's like, fine, I'll be anxious too. Leave me alone. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is marriage. Now, I'm sure I only mean like 18% of that. But nevertheless, you were really delightful. I've now kept you over an hour. I apologize. I really do appreciate you coming on and being open, because you have thoughts that either are pretty different from some people, or at least I think they might not be popular with people, and so it was brave of you to share them. So I really appreciate that. And we came together on the one idea, but then this conversation ended up being way better than that. So thank you so much.
Oh yes, I'm sorry we spent so little time on your original topic.
Now, my original topic was just an excuse to get you on. It's all good. Plus, you answered the question fine. Here's the secret to podcasting. I'm going to give it away at the end of the podcast here. You can't really do a whole hour on one thing. That becomes really boring and nobody wants to listen to that. So you have to have I think it has to be a conversation, and wherever it leads, it leads. And you said some interesting stuff when we first started talking. What was I going to do? Ignore it? Like, what were you going to say? There's worse things than dying, and should I have segued into? So anyway, you're on for this. Like, how would I leave that just hanging up in the air? I'm like, I got to find out what's worse than dying. Let's get to it.
Lots of things. Let's start with a hurricane.
Driving to DC without a map.
Oh my goodness, yes. Oh yes.
All right, Lindsey, you are a cornucopia of feelings. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too. Thanks.
I want to thank Lindsey for coming on and sharing her perspective. I want to thank Dexcom and Omnipod for sponsoring the podcast. There's links in your show notes to find out more about both of the great products. I know the sound quality on this episode was not perfect. There was something going on Lindsey's side, but I just thought her conversation was too valuable not to share. You can look forward to hearing the audio quality that you've come to expect from the podcast in all the weeks moving forward. Just a little hiccup this week. Thanks for being patient.